Good Wednesday morning, everybody. I'm Aaron Gilchrist.
And I'm Ellison Barber. Joe and Savannah are off today. Right now on Morning News Now, far from over, that's the word from Senate Democrats as Republicans shut down comprehensive voting reform. We'll bring you reaction from the White House as some of the Hill's top Democrats work to rebuild the landmark legislation.
Falling short, a COVID concession from the White House. The Biden administration won't meet its ambitious vaccination goal by July 4th. This as Dr. Anthony Fauci sounds the alarm on the rapidly spreading Delta variant. His new warning just ahead.
What comes next? This week, NBC News takes a closer look at the future of policing in America. In the spotlight today, use of force inside the startling hospitalization rate of one of California's police departments and how trust can be rebuilt among the community.
And commuter concerns. Offices across the country are coming back to life, and workers are once again facing that dreaded daily commute after a year at home. We'll let you in on all the latest anxiety-inducing hurdles that could trip up your next trip to the office. First, though, we'll get to the latest on the coronavirus in just a second, including some disturbing news about a new variant called Delta Plus.
Yeah, but we begin with the Senate's failure to advance a voting rights bill. It comes as President Biden faces a critical week for his legislative agenda. The president called the voting rights legislation a top priority, and despite the loss, Democrats say they are down but not out. Meanwhile, the White House is working to move on, quietly pushing forward with an infrastructure plan and an effort to target gun violence. It's our lead story, and we're covering it from both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue with NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell and NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba. Leanne, let's start with you on this. What issues did Republicans have with this bill, and what, if anything, can Democrats do now for voting rights reform?
Good morning, Ellison. So Republicans remained opposed and united in that opposition to this legislation. And overwhelmingly, they say that this is a federal takeover of the elections. And so it's something that they cannot support. Even the two who are most likely to support it, Senator Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, went to the Senate floor to speak in opposition of this legislation. The Democrats, while they lost this vote because it did not get the 60 votes required, they did get a small victory in that all Democrats were united in favor of this legislation. They gained the support of Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who was reluctant for a while to support this procedural motion. He ended up voting with the Democrats. Now Democrats can say that they are opposed, that only Republicans have blocked this measure. Now, while they did lose this vote, Democrats are insisting that the fight is not over. Let's listen to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer.
This vote, I'm ashamed to say, is further evidence that voter suppression has become part of the official platform of the Republican Party. In the fight for voting rights, this vote was the starting gun, not the finish line. Let me say that again. In the fight for voting rights, this vote was the starting gun, not the finish line.
So what can Democrats do? That's a little unclear. There's going to be ramped up pressure for Democrats to get rid of the filibuster, but they don't have the votes for that either. Democrats are also talking about a litigation strategy in the states and in the federal government, and instilling the Justice Department to use all resources necessary to ensure fair and accurate voting at the polls. But legislatively, it's going to be a very tough battle, Ellison.
And Monica, Vice President Harris was actually in the Senate chamber for this vote. Tell us, how did she respond to its failure, and what, if anything, has President Biden said?
And remember, this is just something on her plate that is full of many different homework assignments from the president. Voting rights was added just last month. So she has been talking behind the scenes with lawmakers, trying to see also with voting rights advocates and groups how this could advance. But she was also not very optimistic about obviously what was going to unfold yesterday. But she is saying she has hope for the future, and that in the words of the Senate Majority Leader as well, this battle is just beginning. Take a listen to her response after the measure failed.
It is clear, certainly for the American people, that when we're talking about the right to vote, it is not a Republican concern or a Democratic concern. It is an American concern. This is about the American people's right to vote, unfettered. It is about their access to the right to vote in a meaningful way. Because nobody is debating, I don't believe, whether all Americans have the right to vote. The issue here is there actual access to the voting process, or is that being impeded? And the bottom line is that the President and I are very clear. We support S1. We support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And the fight is not over.
The timeline for this, remember, Ellison and Aaron, was supposed to be the month of June. Obviously, very little runway left if we look at it in terms of that. So this will stretch on into the summer, but the path forward is unclear, though President Biden did release a statement echoing a lot of what the vice president said, but in perhaps a clue of where this goes next. He said he would have a lot more to say on this topic starting next week. So perhaps they will have an event at the White House. Some critics had argued that President Biden didn't say enough when it came to voting rights, that he'd been talking so much about infrastructure, about COVID, of course, hosting those lawmakers at the White House. They were urging him to get more involved, and perhaps that's what we're going to see in a more concentrated way next week.
Yeah, I mean, a lot going on. You mentioned infrastructure, Leanne. White House officials are set to host top Democrats for more infrastructure talks. Where do those stand right now? And is there any hope of a deal here?
Well, Ellison, that's right. Top White House officials are meeting with Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer this evening about infrastructure. While that is happening, we also have these bipartisan negotiations that are still ongoing, also meeting with White House officials. But that bipartisan plan hit a major snag yesterday after meeting with White House officials all day long. Republicans came out pretty deflated because the White House took off more ways to pay for it off the table, including a highway infrastructure bank, repurposing COVID funds. And so they are really running out of options that the two sides can agree on how to pay for this legislation. And that has always been the biggest sticking point. And so if they can't agree how to pay for it, then this deal is going to fall apart. And again, they don't have a lot of time. Meanwhile, Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer are going to meet with White House officials on what is likely to be a partisan package that Democrats can pass alone, something that's going to be much bigger, and that Democrats could much more easily agree how to pay for it, Ellison.
And Monica, the White House has also released new details on the president's plan to address the rise in gun violence nationwide. What is he hoping to do with that?
Later today, the White House is really going to be hosting this larger event with key stakeholders in this issue. And then both the president and the attorney general are going to unveil what they're calling their comprehensive strategy to try to tackle the rise in not just gun violence, but crime nationwide. And what they're going to propose is that each state really make a decision for themselves, leaving this to the local level, but to dip into some of the money that comes from the American Rescue Plan, more than $350 billion that has been allocated at the more local level for people, if police departments want to hire more officers, if they want to pay more overtime, for instance, that they could use that. But this is going to be really the beginning of it. Remember, of course, a couple of months ago, the president unveiled his executive actions at gun violence and really gun safety methods. So that's something we might hear a little bit more on today, because they feel that's a huge part of this problem. But there is a big concern in the White House heading into these summer months, as we've seen these crime rates tick up, that's going to be a huge problem. So they're trying to get out in front of it today by laying out some of the issues and some of the things they feel they can do at the federal level, though, again, they are deferring a lot to these counties and municipalities to decide what's best for them when it comes to this.
All right, voting rights, infrastructure, gun violence, a lot of very important issues. Very busy week, I am sure, for both of you. Thank you so much, Leanne and Monica, for keeping us informed.
The White House says it will likely not meet President Biden's July 4th COVID vaccination goal. The COVID task force conceding that the nation will fall short of the president's target of 70% of adults with at least one dose. Right now, nearly 66% of adults are partially vaccinated. Health officials say younger adults are behind the slowdown in vaccinations. Younger people are also more likely to get infected with that more contagious Delta variant, now accounting for more than 20% of new cases in the U.S.
Similar to the situation in the UK, The Delta variant is currently the greatest threat in the U.S. to our attempt to eliminate COVID-19.
NBC News Now correspondent Maura Barrett is following the latest on the pandemic for us this morning. Maura, first I want to talk to you about President Biden's vaccination goal. What's the White House saying now about missing that benchmark on the deadline he set?
Good morning, Aaron. Well, first, the White House is working to remind the country that Americans are going to be able to celebrate the 4th of July in a much different way than we could have even imagined when Biden first took office earlier this year. So they're definitely reminding of that, but also acknowledging that they are going to miss what they are calling an ambitious goal. We heard from Press Secretary Jen Psaki yesterday where she detailed the demographic that she sees the reason behind this for. Take a listen to what she said.
We've seen it's been a great deal more difficult to get young people between the ages of 18 and 26 vaccinated than adults who are older than that. Again, we are already meeting the goal of vaccinating with one dose 70% of Americans 30 years of age and older, and we are working toward meeting it for all adults as soon as possible.
The second portion of Biden's vaccination goal was to get 160 million Americans vaccinated. This past weekend, the country hit 150 million fully vaccinated people, adults, and the White House estimating that they will get to that goal by mid-July, even though we're seeing this drop in those daily vaccination rates.
So, Maura, we also just heard Dr. Anthony Fauci call the Delta variant the country's greatest threat right now. What else are we learning about that particular strain?
Right. And like you said, we're seeing about 20% of new cases in America attributed to that Delta variant. That's up from 10% just 2 weeks ago. And Dr. Walensky, the CDC director, is warning that this variant is more transmissible than the other variants that we've seen. Dr. Fauci saying that it actually mimics a similar pattern to what we saw from another variant in the UK, with seeing how it doubles every 2 weeks or so. I want you to hear more from Dr. Walensky about how the unvaccinated are at risk here.
We know our vaccines work against this variant. However, this variant represents a set of mutations that could lead to future mutations that evade our vaccine. And that's why it's more important than ever to get vaccinated now to stop the chain of infection, the chain of mutations that could lead to a more dangerous variant.
And we're already seeing this effect worldwide. The Delta variant is now present in 92 countries, Aaron.
Wow. More than 150 workers at a hospital in Houston have been fired or they've resigned over a vaccination requirement there. What's the latest there?
Right. So you'll remember that just earlier this month, the federal court threw out a case put up by employees of Houston Medical. They were saying they didn't want to have to abide by the vaccine requirement. And this was the first major U.S. healthcare system that we saw put this requirement into place. Now, yesterday was the marker in which the hospital was saying that workers needed to be vaccinated by. They called up some workers and asked if they'd been vaccinated. If they said no, they were fired on the spot, while others, more than 150 in total, resigned of their own volition. Now, some of these nurses and employees at the hospital telling NBC News that they don't feel confident in the vaccine safety, and they're working to elevate this to the federal level. Aaron.
All right, Maura Barrett for us today with our COVID headlines. Maura, thank you.
For more on the pandemic, let's bring in NBC News medical contributor, Dr. Ushay Blackstock. Dr. Blackstock, let's just kind of jump right into this Delta variant. I've spoken to health officials in Missouri on and off last week, and again in that state, they kept telling me that they are seeing an increase in hospitalizations and that the COVID patients hospitalized are way younger than before, 20 to 60 years old, and often unvaccinated. Those are people who could get vaccinated if they wanted to. So what about this new variant and children under the age of 12 who are not able to get a vaccine, even if they or their parents wanted them to?
Right. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. We don't have any signs yet that this Delta variant is more transmissible or more severe in kids than in adults, but obviously it still is a risk. And so until children under 12 can be fully vaccinated, we need to ensure that the adults around them, as many as possible, are vaccinated, and then ensure that when children are in high-risk environments, such as crowded settings and indoors, that we are still abiding by preventive measures, especially in communities where the transmission is high and vaccination rates are quite low. We really have to make sure over the next few months that we're focusing on protecting our children.
In India, doctors there are reporting a new variation of the Delta variant, and they're calling it Delta Plus. They say that it is more transmissible than the original Delta variant. What do we know about that variant at this point in time?
Right. So we still don't know enough about the variant. We know that in order for it to be considered a variant of concern, it's supposed to be more transmissible or cause more severe disease or evade coronavirus antibodies. So it has one of those attributes. But again, those were just shown in lab studies. We need to see how does this variant, Delta Plus variant, behave in real life settings. We already know that it's present in about 8 other countries. But again, I think just like the Delta variant, we know that preventive measures work. We know that vaccination works. And also genomic surveillance is incredibly important to keeping track of these particular variants.
Daily vaccinations, those numbers seem like they are just dropping every day right now. Do you think that people might reconsider getting vaccinated given what we're seeing with the Delta variant? And I guess, are there any convincible unvaccinated people left?
Right. Yes. I definitely think there are some left, and we've seen this in some of the polling. There still are these wait and see folks out there who are waiting for full approval of the vaccines. That will actually cause a shift in making them decide to get the vaccine. But there's also a tremendous amount of misinformation out there, and I think that is one area that the Biden administration is targeting, as well as continuing the incentives, continuing the outreach, especially among young adults 18 to 26.
All right, well, if anybody is looking for a good source to dispel misinformation, your Twitter account is one of my go-tos, Dr. Blackstock. It is always so informative. Thank you so much for your time this morning. We'll see you again soon.
New this morning, results are slowly coming in for New York City's first mayoral primary that used ranked choice voting. Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams is currently in the lead, with civil rights lawyer Maya Wiley in second place this morning. One-time frontrunner and former presidential candidate Andrew Yang conceded last night, promising to work with whomever is elected. The city's use of ranked choice voting and counting absentee ballots mean it could take at least a week to learn the official winner.
Let's get a check at your morning news now weather.
Meteorologist Bill Cairns is joining us. We're hoping with a quieter forecast for the country today. Bill?
We are. So let me ask you guys, what's the hottest temperature you ever remember being in? Like ever Phoenix or Vegas?
I think I was in Palm Springs and it got up to 106 or 7, something like that.
I'm from Georgia. I feel like I could beat that, right? I feel like 110 at least.
Probably, especially factoring the heat index in Georgia, it probably felt like hotter than that sometimes during the summer. So the reason I'm bringing this all up is that, people in the Northwest have not experienced a lot of crazy heat waves, and they're about to get one that's going to be record-shattering. It'll probably be leading all the newscasts come this upcoming weekend. So we're going to talk about that a lot more in the week ahead, but that's probably the next extreme weather event we're going to deal with in the country. The thing over the next 2 days, just some severe weather in the Midwest, very typical summer-like weather. We got a little bit of rain in Illinois right now, no big deal. We'll have isolated severe storms from Iowa through Kansas. A chunk of Nebraska from North Platte to Grand Isle, maybe to Lincoln, could get some storms with damaging winds or maybe some large hail, but it's not a huge risk today. Tomorrow, we get a bigger threat of severe weather. This will be encompassing a good chunk of the Midwest. It leaves out St. Louis and Chicago. I think you're going to get your storms later at night into the early morning hours. But from Kansas City to Omaha to Des Moines, La Crosse, south of Minneapolis, you could deal with some large hail, damaging wind, maybe even a few tornadoes. Again, this is for tomorrow's forecast. And now about that heat wave. Now, because it's going to be such a record-breaking heat wave, it's kind of unusual, but they have they're telling people, trying to get people prepared. There's people that don't have air conditioning that they're worried about as we go throughout the upcoming weekend. So they have what we call an excessive heat watch is in effect for all of these people, mostly in Oregon and Washington state. So how hot will it get? Spokane on Sunday could be 104. Pendleton, Oregon could be 104 and 107. Even Seattle has an outside shot of getting up into the upper 90s. Portland should be over 100 degrees for at least 2 straight days. So this is very unusual heat. Portland's all-time hottest temperature, by the way, is 107, just to give you an idea of how unusually hot this is. And in a lot of these locations, this will be the hottest they've ever been in June. So for today's forecast, if you want beautiful, be in the Great Lakes or the Northeast. Absolutely incredible. It's like a fall, crisp morning. It'll be a beautiful, warm afternoon. And then tomorrow, we stay nice on the eastern seaboard. All of the hot weather is kind of in the middle of the country right now. But we'll have more on that record-shattering expected heat wave this upcoming weekend in the days ahead.
All right, we'll be talking to you a lot, Bill. Thanks. Coming up, the latest installment in the NBC News Future of the Force series.
We'll take a closer look at one California police department's shocking use of force statistics and why so many encounters end with a trip to the ER. That is up next.
Two reports now from our week-long policing series, Future of the Force. We all know the names of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Tamir Rice. But every year, thousands more people end up in the emergency room after a run-in with police. NBC News and the Marshall Project looked at the records of one department. Here's NBC's Gotti Schwartz.
Marissa Santa Cruz and Paya Tukuafu were celebrating Marissa's 22nd birthday at a San Jose hotel when there was a knock on the door. Staff told them to lower their music. The next knock was the police.
San Jose, please open the door.
I'm a big guy, dark too, and just the way how I have, I have my tattoos. Some people can't help but to profile you.
The police told the couple they had to leave. While they were packing, Paya cursed at the officers.
Start packing and let's go, okay? Let me pack.
Then 2 seconds later,
Push up and tase this guy. Taser, taser, taser!
The officers used tasers, batons, and a riot gun.
I put myself in between them, and then I was on the floor. All I remember was feeling pain.
Marissa and Paya were taken to the hospital for their injuries. Nationwide, at least 80,000 people are sent to the hospital each year after an interaction with law enforcement or security guards. NBC News found over the past 3 years in San Jose, 43% of use of force incidents ended in a trip to the emergency room.
Are you comfortable with how many people are being hospitalized after use of force incidents?
No, we need to do better. But again, any use of force incident is driven by the noncompliance of the individual that we're trying to detain or arrest.
The San Jose Police Department says the numbers are high because they're doing the right thing, taking people to the hospital for even minor complaints.
Is focus being put on de-escalation as opposed to resorting to use of force?
We're always looking for opportunities to better ourselves. De-escalation, slowing things down, tactical conduct, all these things are basis for how our officers interact with members of the community.
In and of itself, cussing at a police officer is not enough for them to be able to use force.
Bryce Peterson specializes in police use of force. He says across the country, de-escalation will help rebuild trust between communities and the police.
Officers are there to protect and serve. And so when people see the result of that and it results in people being hospitalized or brutalized, it can definitely erode public trust.
Marissa and Paya were not charged and are suing the department. In response to their lawsuit, San Jose police say the use of force was appropriate, reasonable, and constitutionally permissible. Marissa, whose father works in law enforcement, said that night at the hotel has changed how she sees police.
I always did respect police, and I always trusted them with everything because I knew them. I knew a lot of them. And then having this happen firsthand, was the biggest wake-up call.
While Paya, who works as an unarmed security guard, says he always tries to de-escalate with empathy and understanding.
You put yourself in their shoes and you can automatically feel what they're going through.
And despite what happened, he still hopes to fulfill his dream of going into law enforcement. Gotti Schwartz, NBC News, San Jose, California.
And staying with policing now, the murder of George Floyd sparked a nationwide movement for justice, leading politicians in blue and red states to promise police reform. But are they keeping their word? NBC News Now correspondent Dasha Burns takes a look.
The goal is to make sure we never have in Texas what happened to George Floyd up in Minnesota. The process begins right now.
Lawmakers promising policy, activists calling for change. Red state or blue state, Americans across the country voiced widespread support for police reform.
But are all states keeping their word? The fate of a community's police reform bill depends on where the state's political leadership stands.
On the federal level, although lawmakers across the aisle are continuing talks on police reform, negotiations stalling because of split views between Democrats and Republicans on whether to include qualified immunity, a provision protecting law enforcement officers from lawsuits around misconduct. And weeks after the first anniversary of George Floyd's death and President Joe Biden's deadline for Congress to pass a reform bill, still nothing is set in stone. This political fissure bleeds over to the state level, stalling reforms.
Most of this legislation that you're seeing that's really being able to make wide waves has been done at the local level. It's just unfortunate that the politics have begun to take over when you start looking at state level politics around the country.
Some states, like Colorado, where Democrats hold the majority in both chambers, already passed comprehensive reform bills. Meanwhile, states primarily led by Republican lawmakers are hitting more roadblocks. In George Floyd's home state of Texas, the Texas Legislative Black Caucus introducing the George Floyd Act last August.
We are doing this George Floyd Act to address the many injustices that Mr. Floyd had endured and experienced, but also so many other individuals.
But what would have been a comprehensive reform law ultimately failing to pass in the Republican-led State House. Some parts of the bill, like banning chokeholds for law enforcement officers during an arrest, signed into law to take effect this coming September. But many components, including a provision about qualified immunity, ultimately dismissed.
Think about it. You now have several bills that are at play that have been chosen to be signed off on that are going to hold police officers more accountable. Is that the best that they could have done? No, it's not.
In Florida, where the GOP controls the House, Senate, and governor's office, lawmakers introducing dozens of bills, among them a bill that centers on de-escalation and restricting the use of chokeholds, now heading to Governor DeSantis' desk. The governor's office did not immediately respond to News Now's request for comment on if and when he would sign it into law. However, critics say while the bill marks progress, it's just the bare minimum.
Why don't you consider it reform?
Because a lot of this we were already doing in Florida, right?
Over in Ohio, where the GOP controls both chambers, Republican Governor Mike DeWine announcing in April plans for police reform.
This bill will increase accountability and transparency in law enforcement.
But over a month since his announcement, a spokesperson for DeWine telling NBC News Now that they are still awaiting introduction in the Ohio General Assembly. And in North Carolina, while lawmakers are introducing many proposals, most are still pending, according to the National Conference of State Legislatures. One comprehensive reform bill passing in the Senate in May calling for police officers to intervene and report the excessive use of force also includes a provision requiring that families be able to access body camera footage within 5 days of an incident. This provision comes on the heels of Andrew Brown Jr.'s death in North Carolina in April. Following an officer-involved shooting, family members say there's a discrepancy in what happened between the 20 seconds of video originally shown to them and the 18 minutes of footage they were able to access under a judge's order.
Why is it that they get to choose what's the pertinent parts of the video to show the family?
Over a year out from George Floyd's death, the question remains, will lawmakers keep their word to turn calls for action into law?
And that was Dasha Burns reporting for us.
Let's take a look now at what's making news around the world this morning.
Raf Sanchez joins us now from Tel Aviv. Good morning to you.
Ellison, Aaron, good morning. Hong Kong's most prominent pro-democracy newspaper is shutting down after a campaign of intimidation by Chinese authorities. After Apple Daily was an outspoken voice for freedom in the territory, but it says it can no longer continue after police arrested top editors and froze its bank accounts. European soccer authorities have banned a German city from illuminating its stadium with the rainbow pride flag. The plan was to light up the Munich arena in support of LGBTQ rights ahead of Germany's match against Hungary, where gay people are facing a crackdown. But European soccer's governing body said that wasn't allowed. And finally, a giant panda in Tokyo gave birth to twins early this morning. The cubs were born at Ueno Zoo early today and are doing well. News of their mom's pregnancy sent stock in nearby restaurants soaring in anticipation of a wave of tourists. So guys, a real baby boost for that area, courtesy of these little newborn pandas.
I wasn't sure where you were going with the boost in with the stock price going up for the restaurants. I was like, wait a minute, were they? No, okay. For tourists coming in, that makes sense now.
We ended on pandas. Always good. Raf, thank you so much.
Coming up, a shocking post-game incident on a high school basketball court in California.
The outrage and allegations of racism that followed.
Welcome back. The Emmys will give performers a gender-neutral option this year. Winners and nominees can now request that their nomination certificate and the Emmy statuette carry the term performer in place of actor or actress. The categories themselves will not change, though. The nominees for this year's awards will be announced on July 13th. So we can look forward to that ceremony in the fall.
All right. That's exciting. It feels overdue. Good to see that. All right. Now, shifting gears a bit here, there is outrage over an apparent racist incident in Southern California after tortillas were thrown at a high school basketball team during a post-game celebration. The entire incident was caught on camera, and an investigation by school officials is now underway. NBC News correspondent Guad Venegas has more.
Ellison, this is a post-game incident that's caused a lot of anger with the players, the coaches, and the parents, of course, of all the members of this basketball team who say it was wrong to have tortillas thrown at them. And now they want those responsible to be held accountable.
What the heck? Freaking tortillas?
After a crushing championship loss for the predominantly Hispanic Orange Glen High School basketball team from the outskirts of San Diego, insult added to injury when several players were pelted by tortillas.
Racist!
They say fans and players from the opposing team, Coronado High, a predominantly white school in an affluent area, were throwing them.
It's racist and it was planned. It was not a spur of the moment thing.
Tortillas and all that smack talking with the coaches, like, that's just unacceptable.
On Twitter, Coronado's coach writing, a community member brought tortillas and distributed them, which was unacceptable and racist in nature. The district school board also weighing in. We fully condemn the racism, classism, and colorism which fueled the actions of the perpetrators, who the district promises to hold accountable. But members of Orange Glen's team say the sting of defeat pales against the wounds of racism.
Take a win, move on, and enjoy it. But to kind of downplay us and humiliate us like that.
I just think it's sad that their crowd's idea of as a joke is throwing tortillas at a Hispanic school.
A reminder that without sportsmanship, even the winning side doesn't come out on top. And since the game, the video of the incident has been shared on social media, only adding more pressure to the Coronado Unified School District to take action. Ellison?
Well, parents so often try to monitor what their kids are doing online, but some of the biggest social media platforms don't always make that easy. And one family is demanding change after their worst fears came true. NBC News senior national correspondent Kate Snow has the story.
Our son, Sammy, was an amazing kid.
In a new campaign, Dr. Laura Berman and her husband Sam warn parents drug dealers are using social media to connect with kids.
We experienced every parent's worst pain. We lost our son.
Sammy bought what he thought was a pharmaceutical drug through a dealer he met on Snapchat, but it contained a lethal amount of fentanyl.
You're becoming an advocate, it sounds like.
Mostly just because I've been so unbelievably infuriated by how little our children are protected.
There are a wide range of parental monitoring tools and apps out there. Most allow parents to block entire sites, but the Bermans want social media companies to work with monitoring apps to make it easier to screen children's content within social media sites.
The problem is not all platforms accommodate parent monitoring software.
And the ones that don't are the ones our kids are populating.
An app called Bark flags worrisome posts or messages about drugs, bullying, mental health, or violence. But on iPhones, Snapchat, TikTok, and Instagram direct messages are not accessible to Bark.
That's the bare minimum we should be able to expect from the social media platforms that are making gajillions of dollars off of us and our children.
Our son ordered drugs off of a colorful menu. The words on that menu would have alerted us if we had had parent monitoring software allowed on Snapchat.
Snapchat says it's deliberate about what user information can be released to third-party apps and says it's willing to work with parental apps as long as it doesn't compromise the security and data privacy of our community. Snapchat also says it's looking into developing their own parental controls within the app. The company declined to specifically comment on Bark. TikTok did not explain why they don't share content with Bark, but highlighted its commitment to promote a safe and age-appropriate experience for teens. Instagram had no statement, but a company spokesperson says they're focused on safety measures for teens, including limiting interactions between teens and adult strangers. The Bermans' youngest son uses Snapchat every day. He's posted 380,000 times.
I'm not interested in taking social media down. What I want is for them to partner with us and be as invested in protecting our children as they should be, since our children live there, or at the very least, don't stand in the way of us protecting them.
Through their grief, a new mission to help other families. Kate Snow, NBC News.
Well, coming up, it's unfortunately looking like your post-pandemic commute will become a little more stressful.
What you can now expect when you take that giant leap back into the office. Stay with us. As America reopens and life gets a little more normal, it seems there's at least one thing people might actually miss about the pandemic: working from home. A recent Gallup poll shows 40% of white-collar workers would rather keep working remotely instead of commuting. For more on that, I want to bring in NBC News senior business reporter Ben Popkin. Ben, you wrote an article for NBCnews.com. It's called "Welcome to Your New Commute: Higher Prices, Safety Fears, and Reduced Transit Schedules." Tell us what you've learned and what's driving the change.
Well, workers called back to office, they're finding their commute schedules have been rejiggered. Fewer buses and trains are running after transit lines cut service, with plummeting ridership and revenue during the pandemic. There's also some increased costs that they're facing. Some workers who used to take public transit, they may not feel comfortable with that anymore. They're choosing to drive, or they have to drive, and now they have to deal with the cost of gas and finding parking. And after a year and a half of being at home, people are just understandably a little anxious about riding public transit again, being in a enclosed space with strangers. And riders may have health concerns. They're concerned about perceived higher numbers of homeless and drug users congregating at stations, rising crime. Just coming out of that bubble, it feels a little uncomfortable at first.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big step for us to kind of leave that world to whatever your normal looked like. Another thing, though, I do want to ask you about is you talked about workers can kind of create some sort of standoff, if you will, this whole situation with management and employees. What are you talking about there?
Sure. Well, that's more of a renegotiation happening between employers and employees. Some uncomfortable conversations are happening. Workers are saying, well, you're telling me I have to come in and now I have to drive in to feel safe. So will you be covering parking? Will you be helping defray some of my gas expenses? What about putting together a employee shuttle or covering Uber or Lyft costs. Other workers are citing their productivity gains during the pandemic and saying that time I spent commuting is now spent working. Maybe we can use this as an argument for more remote working days. And frankly, some workers can't or won't get vaccinated, and they have vowed to never to return. Employers have to decide how to handle each of these individual cases.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a new world for all of us here. And I imagine, though, as we're talking about some of those negotiations and back and forth with employees and bosses, that the conversations happening might be a little bit different depending on your life circumstance, right? I think one thing that you talk about in this article is working parents. Can you explain to us sort of the different challenges that they might have? I mean, it's got to be very different than, say, a single 28-year-old going back to work. What are the concerns for working parents?
Number one issue, childcare. Workers, they can't find childcare. Many of these daycare centers have closed or have reduced operations. They can't get staff. Even if a worker can find childcare, it may not open in time for them to be able to get to work at their usual time. They have to ask for later flexible time. And just overall, childcare may be too expensive to make it worth it to go back to work. I spoke to a recently widowed mother of 2 young children. She started a remote job during the pandemic. She's being called back to the office in September. Now she's scrambling to try to find a new remote job. Otherwise, she's going to have to quit.
That's a tough situation. But maybe the one silver lining here is that a lot of us are dealing with these unique restarts, if you will, and hopefully we can kind of lean on each other and be a little understanding. Ben, thank you for your reporting and explaining all that to us.
Sure.
Britney Spears is speaking out today in the legal battle with her father over control of her life. Today, both are expected to appear in court remotely for a major hearing about Spears' conservatorship. This could be the most significant hearing yet in the singer's crusade to regain control of her finances and her life decisions. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin is outside the courthouse in Los Angeles for us. Aaron, good morning.
Good morning, Aaron. That's right. Britney Spears is expected to testify here later today. This is the first time we will hear from her in her own words about the conservatorship, and legal experts say it's a hearing that could be full of drama.
Will I ever take the stage again? I have no idea. I'm having fun right now. I'm a transition in my life.
This morning, Britney Spears expected to push for that transition in court, speaking out for the first time against her father and his control of her life. For 13 years, Jamie Spears has been at the helm of a court-ordered conservatorship for his daughter and her $60 million fortune. Britney wants him out, claiming their relationship is toxic. Her lawyer telling the court the pop star refuses to perform as long as her dad serves as her conservator. In court documents from 2016, leaked to the New York Times but not reviewed by NBC News, the superstar says the conservatorship has become an oppressive and controlling tool against her, and it restricted everything from whom she dated to the color of her kitchen cabinets. Last year, her attorney told the judge Britney was afraid of her father. While the records provide a glimpse into just a part of the court case, legal experts say at today's hearing, Britney is expected to openly air her grievances and could face cross-examination from her dad's lawyers.
How difficult will it be for her to persuade the court?
I don't think it's going to be very difficult at all. There has been a clear breakdown for over 2 years in this relationship.
The court ordered the conservatorship back in 2008 after the star was placed in 2 involuntary psychiatric holds following a public breakdown. Legally, the singer can't make any significant decisions about her career, finances, or personal life without the oversight of her conservatorship.
What do we want?
Earlier this year, the documentary Framing Britney Spears reignited a movement to free her, fans believing she sends them cryptic messages through her Instagram videos. Reps for Britney and Jamie Spears declined our requests for comment. But earlier this year, his attorney told us Jamie Spears has diligently and professionally carried out his duties as one of Britney's conservators, and his love for his daughter and dedication to protecting her is clearly apparent to the court. Some experts believe by trying to push her father out, Britney is laying the groundwork to end all outside control of her life.
Britney, who can still work, a few years ago was making millions and millions of dollars in Las Vegas. It is extremely unusual for a conservatorship of this length to involve someone like Britney Spears.
You know, I got to tell you, Aaron,
legal experts say that. Yes, Aaron.
Well, I was going to ask. I mean, this is still a head scratcher on so many levels. Just how this all came together. Obviously, you explained it really well. I'm also curious. Does Britney Spears' father actually benefit financially in any way from this conservatorship?
You know, he does. According to court documents, he receives $16,000 a month for compensation as her conservator. In addition to that, according to media reports, he also receives a percentage of all entertainment deals that Britney signs, which some critics point to as a potential conflict of interest.
Yeah, I can see that. All right, Aaron McLaughlin for us out in L.A. today. Interesting story, Aaron. Thank you. Well, it is time now for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
Christina Partsinevelos joins us now. Good morning, Christina.
Good morning, Allison. So we got Microsoft joining an exclusive club, becoming just the second publicly traded company to reach a market value of $2 trillion, along with Apple. Microsoft hitting the threshold briefly during yesterday's session before sliding back just shy of $1.99 trillion. The milestone comes 2 years after the company crossed the $1 trillion mark. Microsoft stock has been boosted in part by the pandemic as demand increased for its software and cloud services. Twitter is letting users apply to be part of a limited test of its Super Follows and Ticketed Spaces features. Super Follows lets people charge $2.99, $4.99, or $9.99 per month for access to exclusive content. Ticketed Spaces lets you charge anywhere between $1 and almost $1,000 for access to one of Twitter's social audio rooms and offers extra features such as setting a cap on the room size. The test group will initially be able to keep 97% of the money they make. Keyword initially. And real estate and cash top the list of Americans' preferred ways to invest over a period of 10 years or more. That's according to a new Bankrate survey. The stock market, though, topped the list in 2020, with more than a quarter of people preferring that option, but only 16% of those actually invested in stocks this year. Nearly 30% now say real estate is their top choice amid record low interest rates. You also have cash investments such as savings accounts and CDs that are a close second at 25%. So that's the highest level you've seen since 2014. So it's surprising that despite the spike in stock markets, you still see people push towards real estate because of those low rates.
Yeah. All right, Christina Partsinevelos for us at CNBC. Thank you.
Coming up, there's a whole lot to smile about as the country returns to some form of normalcy.
But ditching the mask has some people a little self-conscious about their not-so-pearly whites. Inside the post-pandemic teeth whitening boom. Next.
After a year hiding behind masks, we're showing our mouths to the world again. And for some people, apparently, that means urgent action is required.
Yeah, Smile Direct Club says teeth whitening is up 47% this year. NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce reports from the dentist chair.
The last year kind of sucked. Finally, there's plenty to smile about again, and some of us are due for an upgrade.
Now that these masks are coming off, the smiles are getting brighter. Teeth whitening is one of the many cosmetic dental procedures that's having a post-pandemic renaissance.
The first thing you notice about a person is their smile. So if you leave a good impression with your smile, that's going to last a very long time. You're going to feel good about yourself. You're going to make people around you feel good about themselves as well.
Here at The Bright Spot, a boutique teeth whitening company in Los Angeles, Hike is helping clients like Diana confidently reclaim their social lives.
Now that regulations are being lifted, we're actually going to be able to go out, get a few cute selfies.
And she's not the only one. Business is booming.
End of May, beginning of June, everything just basically doubled.
A short drive away in Beverly Hills, celebrity dentist Dr. Victoria Weitzman is also trying to keep up with pent-up demand.
I mean, some of our days are running like 12 or 13 hours. What I'm finding is a lot of people are kind of coming out of the woodwork. So I'm seeing patients that, for instance, I did consultations on maybe 2 years ago, pre-COVID. Now we're finally deciding that this is the right time to do a smile makeover.
That might include anything from anti-aging dentistry to a full mouth reconstruction, which could cost up to $4,500. And beyond LA city limits, people all across the country are saying,
We've seen a 47% increase in our teeth whitening products this year so far.
Dr. Jeffrey Sulitzer is the Chief Clinical Officer at Smile Direct Club. They sell DIY teeth whitening and straightening kits, and they've been tracking this trend nationwide.
Since the stimulus checks have been distributed, people clearly have more discretionary spend, and they are spending it on their smile.
For lots of patients, this goes deeper than just the veneer of vanity, with major milestones paused.
We've had weddings that have been on hold. You know, we've had graduation parties, birthdays that have been on hold that people haven't gotten the opportunity to celebrate.
And dreams delayed.
Everyone wants to better themselves now, and I feel like this pandemic too has sort of made people want to take that next step, next leap in their careers.
After a season stained with so much darkness, this is one small way to seize the brighter days ahead.
And that was Simone Boyce reporting for us. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
The news continues right now.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.